The form of land tenure system is the customary land tenure system, and this form of land tenure system is covered under Article 63 of the Kenyan Constitution. And customary land law tenure system largely was dominated by colonialism in Kenya, but the system has been significantly replaced by agrarian policy introduced by colonial government. So this system of communal land system of customary land system existed mostly during the colonial period before colonialism. So however, there are some communities and areas in Kenya which still remain under the authority of customary land, over which the application of formalization process has had significant consequences. It's nevertheless important to study this system of law because it forms the foundation of the regime of law regulating the ownership and possession of property and the process of property transaction in Kenya. So it forms the law of regulation of property, and also forms the law of property transaction in Kenya, this community land ownership. So if you want to understand more about this property transaction in Kenya and law regulations, this form of community land ownership, this form of land tenureship of community land ownership is important. So customary land law tenure owes its legitimacy to traditional communities where land was owned by community basis, by different tribes, groups of people who lived in the region presently known as Kenya. So it owes its foundation of origin in traditional aspects of communities where people lived in communities and owned land. So that is the history of community land ownership in Kenya before colonial rule. So people used to exist in community, and different communities, different tribes, different social groups existed together, and they had land as a community. So when colonial people came, they disrupted that thing of community land ownership. So though Kenya is composed of diverse groups of people and different values and perception, and despite the fact that there are being varying forms of ownership of land, it's possible to discern certain common characteristics in land tenure system of communities. However, it's vital to note that the social transformation of people and their philosophy as determined by the text of the historical stage of development, hunting and gathering, herding and settled farming, etc., were important influence on the land tenure system of each traditional community. So it depends with that community's activity. So if this community was of hunters and gatherers, so their activity there was hunting and gathering, this community owned land according to those practices that they were practicing. So hunters and gatherers lived together and shared a common piece of land as a community of hunters and gatherers. Those who practice herding shared a piece of land, like the Maasais, and they shared that piece of land as hunters and gatherers. So this is the land of Maasais. They are a community. They own it as a community of hunters and gatherers because of their activity, because they know how they herd these cattle and how they take care of their cattle. So it depends on the particular community and their social activities that they practice. So customary land tenure was and still is anchored on the premise that land is much more than the physical soil. Like in many other African societies, traditional and philosophy ascribed a sacred significance to land. So there's this sacred significance to land, and they view land as more significant thing than soil itself. So in particular, land did not belong to one particular person but God. So there is some spirituality. So they view land to below that is greater than the soil, and land has been given by God. So the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry into the Land Law Systems of Kenya captured this phenomenon in the following terms in its 2002 report, the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry. So according to the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry, for indigenous Kenya, land also has important spiritual value. For land is not merely a factor of production. It is first and foremost the medium which defines and binds together social and spiritual relations with and across generation. Issues about ownership and control are valued as much about the structure of social and cultural relationships. They are about access to material livelihood. This is one reason why debates about land tenure in Africa always revolves around the structure and dynamics of lineage and cultural community rather than strict judicial principles and precedents. That's why you find that there are alternative ways of dispute resolution, because disputes related to land cannot just be solved by judicial principles and precedents, because there's some spiritualities, there's some beliefs among those particular communities. That's why it will revolve around the dynamics of and lineages of cultural communities. So there's some spirituality in this community land ownership. That's according to the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry. That it's also important to consider the dynamics of particular communities and society rather than it's important to consider the dynamics and structures of those particular communities. So this meant that members of particular community could exercise certain rights over land in varying degrees of equality with others of the same community. In turn, that right was sacred by virtue of membership in that community, or more specifically by membership into a community or its unit. Of course, required the performance of certain obligations, which in turn define the rights of access and use of land. So the degree of access and use exercised by particular members will also depend on the status of that member. So the status is also included in the degree of practice. So in essence, customary land tenure was inclusive in nature. It includes everybody, every individual. It's not about private people, but not about private ownership. This form of tenure is inclusive in nature. It involves all people, members of the community. So this form of land ownership is inclusive in nature. Customary land ownership. So in the Constitution of Kenya, customary land ownership is covered under Article 63 of the Constitution. So the community land shall be held by community identified on the basis of ethnicity, culture, and similar community interests. What are the interests of these people? It's important to note what interests the people have. So to classify that land as a community land, their ethnicity, what is their culture? So according to Article 63, Sub-Article 1, it's important to note the ethnicity and culture of that similar community interest. Sub-Article 2, community land consists of, Sub-Article 2A, land registered in the name of group representative under the provision of any law. If you register this land as a group, then it shall be recognized as a community land. Land transferred to the specific community by the process of law. So if the process of law has been involved, court process and all the process of law that led to the transfer of that piece of land to a particular community, then that land shall be recognized as a community land by virtue of Article 63, Sub-Article 2B. Any land to be declared as community land by the Act of Parliament. So if the Act of Parliament recognizes a particular land as a community land, then therefore that land shall be classified as a community land. Land that is lawfully held and managed and used by specific community as a community, like community forest, grazing, shrines, ancestral land, and traditionally occupied by hunters and gatherers. Communities or lawfully held as is in trust by the county government. So land held in trust by county government for the community shall also be recognized as community land. So that is according to the provision of Article 63 of community land ownership. So that is about community land ownership, land that is owned by a particular community, group of people with similar culture, ethnicity, sharing the same language, they have the same behavior. So it's important to note these people, their behavior, their culture, activity, so that to classify that particular land as a community land. So if this land belongs to hunters and gatherers, those people have a common practice. They practice hunting and gathering. That's why that land shall be theirs. These people are pastoralists. The activity that they practice is pastoralist activities. So then that land shall be theirs by virtue of their activity and behavior. So people with the same behavior will have form a community and will have land, their own land, as that particular community or group of people with similar behavior have the same and you have that land. So that is about community land ownership.